This is the Microsoft Cloud Show, episode 68. We're going to catch up on some of the latest cloud news and interview Chris O'Brien, recorded February 18th, 2015.
Welcome to the Microsoft Cloud Show, the only place to stay up to date on everything going on in the Microsoft Cloud world, including Windows Azure, Office 365, SharePoint, Exchange, Lync, and related technologies. Just the information, no marketing, no BS. I'm Chris Johnson.
And I'm Andrew Cole.
And we're just two dudes telling you how we see it.
Hey AC, how's it going?
Doing good, CJ. How are you doing?
Oh my goodness, crazy week.
Yeah?
But good.
Nothing's going on with you guys this week, right?
There's been a little bit of news. It's made my life kind of busy at work. I got home yesterday and my wife was like, "Are you okay?" I was like, "I'm so dead." But yeah, it's been really busy, but really good stuff. And we'll cover some of that in today's episode. But what have you been up to?
A whole lot of crazy stuff. Actually, a bit depressed today. I actually did mail order fish for my fish tank. I ordered them on Sunday, and FedEx decided to hold all orders in Memphis while there was an ice storm going through. So I had 12 of 14 fish show up DOA.
Oh no.
Yeah, I talked to the vendor, and he's like, "Yeah, I've got about 60 orders that have all been like stuck in Memphis, so I've got to re-ship all of them." He said, "But I'm not shipping anything this week. It's all that damn snow in the Northeast U.S. and the ice storm going across central U.S." So
that's brutal. Those storms are crazy.
When I pulled out a bunch of bags and they felt like they were about 50 degrees, I was like, "Yeah, this isn't going to work."
Hey, well, if it's any concern to you, we started a fish tank. We seem to be pretty good at killing fish too. So,
congratulations! It's by far the easiest part of having a fish tank.
Yeah, we're learning. We're trying really hard not to, but we're learning the ropes.
All good.
But anyway, so that sounds a little sad, but hopefully the next batch will arrive swimming.
Yeah, yeah. These are definitely floating. I'm bummed because the kids were all excited to see them in the bags and everything. I was like, yeah, this isn't going to happen.
Yeah, not so good. Oh, dear. Oh, poor fish.
My wife's been instructed to keep them out of the office until I can clear the buckets out. But anyway.
Yes, carnage. Hey, so on to the news. We've got some things we want to talk through before we dive into the interview. But there's been some stuff happening off in Office 365 this week, some news that was announced. So why don't you kick things off and talk a little bit about the first compliance article we're going to talk about?
Absolutely, yeah. So this week, we've had a tremendous amount of news coming out both around 365 and around Microsoft Azure. So we're going to punt the Azure news into next week's episode. Even Scott Guthrie had one of his like, "Hey, look, here's 50 new things we did in the last 4 hours."
Oh, is that it?
Yeah. So first one, though, we'll focus on 365 and then have a great discussion in the second part of the show. But first is that on the Office 365 blog, there is a post called "The Latest Innovations in Office 365 Compliance." And this actually is going to dovetail nice into some of the Azure news that we have as well that we'll cover next week. But it really says that the announcement is that Microsoft is announcing 2 new additions over the compliance capabilities. One of them is the ISO 27018 compliance.
That just rolls off the tongue, doesn't it?
It does. I made sure I got this post up while I was doing it. So what this is that this is saying that basically 3 things. It's a standard for the protection of personally identifiable information, or PII, data in public clouds. There are 3 big commitments to this. One is that O365 is advertising free, so customers don't have to worry that their data that they put into 365 is used for advertising or marketing purposes. Google and Facebook are looking around like going, "You can do that?" There are defined policies for the return, transfer, and secure disposal of personally identifiable information. And 365 proactively discloses the identities of sub-processors. Another bit of compliance was that it was something called high trust. That's a one word, HITRUST. And it's an important standard for U.S. healthcare organizations. And it was established by something called the Common Security Framework, which is a certifiable framework that can be used by any and all organizations to create, access, store, and exchange personal health and financial information. So we'll link to both of these. It's got a nice little frequently asked question. I'll link to the blog post here in the show notes so that anybody who's interested in this, they can dive in and take a look.
Yeah, I think this is, I don't know much about the standards themselves or the ISO is it specification, I guess? Is that the right word for it?
You're Microsoft. I guess you're getting better with the standards bit, so I get that.
Oh, you cut me teeth, I see. You cut me teeth.
Hey, I'm kidding.
Hey, but nice to think we're getting better. There's nothing like starting. Anywho, so I don't know much about these in particular because it's not my area of interest or expertise, but I guess there's a bunch of customers that sort of are in various regulated industries and things like that can't use your software unless you stick to certain standards or certain compliance frameworks, I guess. Is that a right word? So I think we do a pretty good job. Like, as far as I know, the Trust Center lists out a whole bunch of things, a lot of US-centric, but there's other ones around the world as well. And it just seems like another notch in the belt in terms of making more customers being able to use it.
Yeah, I agree. There was some cool news about this around the trust and security and certification stuff, also with the Azure side as well from your general counsel. But we'll do the Azure news next week. Yeah, there was another bit of news that's kind of kept you a tad bit, I don't know, preoccupied, would you say?
Yeah, that's probably fair to say. Yeah, so on yesterday, the 17th of Feb, we're recording this on the 18th, we put a blog post up about a new version of our iOS applications, so Office for iOS, that lets third-party cloud storage providers hook their storage into the Office apps. So in the past, it used to be, OneDrive for Business, and Dropbox, and now third-party storage providers will be able to update their own iOS applications to support effectively the iCloud document picker is the thing that does this behind the scenes. But in Office, you'll be able to say, open from another location, and any apps that you've got installed on the box or on your iPad that support this will show up as locations you could open and edit documents from. So that's the first part. The news we saw was pretty great. Like, it was mostly about the iOS stuff, and that people are excited about being able to edit and view and do all those sorts of things with their documents in Office from their favorite storage location, like Box, Salesforce, and Citrix, were the three folks that we talked about in the blog post as early partners that are building this into their iOS apps. I think Box is supported today. Like, they updated their apps yesterday or today or something like that.
Yeah, I think something like that. This is, it was funny because when this news came out, some people were kind of like, but to me, this really shows the openness of Microsoft and of the Office 365 group and being able to open the platform. We want to be everywhere that you are and where you work. I mean, I'll admit it, cards on the table, that I was starting to gravitate away from the Office web apps and on iOS because they were only OneDrive. And I kept all my stuff in Dropbox. And so I started to move my stuff over to Google Docs. But this totally, first, the fact that it started to adopt Dropbox, I think it was late 2014, got me to start switching over. This is just even doubling down on it even more. Shows quite a bit to see the first image on this blog post that we'll link to. Shows that where do you want to store your content? And it's showing iCloud and Box. There was actually a tweet by someone yesterday that this is like huge win, huge feather in the Microsoft cap. Mary Jo Foley put something out on Twitter, and then this guy named K Blank responded. And he said, Mary Jo, so what's the point of Google Docs or iWorks now? Microsoft just eliminated the need to use the competition. You guys had to be going over there. Like, someone had to be who made this decision to push this over here. Like, I don't know how to pronounce his name. Chris Koningsbauer?
Kurt Koningsbauer, yeah.
The dude must have jumped on his desk and done a Heisman thing. Just like, yeah, that's right.
I saw that tweet too. It made me grin from ear to ear. It just bugged people. Like, this just seems like a hygiene thing to me. Like, it's a huge move for us. Stop laughing. I said hygiene. It's a hygiene thing. It's like, it just pissed people off that they couldn't open and edit documents from whatever location they chose, much like yourself, right? And so It just seems fair to not bug people.
Yeah, I agree.
I'm a pretty simple guy, and that's kind of how I'd sum it up. But the Google comment on Twitter is pretty hilarious because I was thinking about that this morning, and it was like, it makes us look open and Google look proprietary and closed. Like, you can only open docs from, as I understand it, maybe you guys can correct me, but in Google Apps, you can only open docs from Google Drive, and that's it.
Yep, that's true.
And so it's kind of funny, eh? It's like, it's like now Office, you can open it from anywhere, but Google, you can only open it from their storage. It kind of looks like the other protectionist proprietary vendor now.
There are 2 bits of reaction that I've now seen come out that have been in favor of Microsoft in response to something that Microsoft did. One of them was this one. And then maybe just a month ago when Microsoft had their big HoloLens Windows 10 kind of preview party announcement. And I think it was Gizmodo had a post that something along the lines that said, "When did Apple become the boring one?"
Oh yeah, I saw you post that. Yeah,
and I know that both of these posts are very quip. I know that they're not like official statements. I know that they're really off the cuff. I get all that, but just the fact that Microsoft did stuff like this that gets the open world to kind of open up their eyes and have that kind of reaction. That it shows it's a new day.
Yeah,
it's cool stuff.
So in fact, the second part of that blog post, I think, is probably the more interesting one long term than the iOS one, which is we're doing the same thing in Office Online, so the web apps. And the reason I think that's more interesting is that I don't think people have really grokked how big a deal this is yet, but I think long term this will be the most interesting one. Imagine all of the web apps and SaaS applications that people are building that have something to do with documents, right? So it could be a piece of accounting software like Xero.com or something like that you upload documents to for whatever reason. They might contain, trip reports or expense claims or, things like that, like Excel docs and stuff. But now they no longer have to figure out what their viewing and editing strategy is for those documents. They can use Office Online. And so in the past, they were stuck with having to use hokey viewers that would balk the fidelity of the documents, and now they can integrate with Office Online to do it. There's email providers, like imagine all the email providers that have attachments. They've got webmail, outside of Gmail and Hotmail and all that. There's a whole bunch of others that have attachments. They want to be able to do viewing and stuff and want to show them in full fidelity. And then all of the enterprise and sort of business style SaaS apps like Box, right? And similar style type apps that are focused on businesses that have documents in them that want to be able to view and edit them in Office, and now they can hook that up.
Yeah, it's a big announcement. It's very, very cool to see Microsoft going in this direction. So
yeah, it was a very exciting day, and like the press was great and all of that. So it went really well.
Very cool. Congratulations.
Yeah, thanks.
So the last bit of news that we want to touch on before we move on here is it's a blog post by an old friend of mine, Stefan Goßner.
Oh yeah, long-time content management guy. He
had a post that is basically an awareness of a new change to how updates get rolled out to SharePoint, specifically on-prem. I don't know how it happens on Office 365. I don't want to know. I assume but at any rate.
We've just got auto update turned on and it all just happens.
Just a bunch of checkboxes go, say reboot. That explains, it's...
No, you got to go around and press the buttons on each machine, man. You got to give each one the 3-finger salute.
Really? You actually do that? I thought you just pulled the cable. So the basically what the change is that Microsoft has always gone and deployed updates to SharePoint using something called cumulative updates, or this has been going on at least for a while. And every month there is a package of security and hot fixes and other updates that happen to the product, and customers would be advised to say if you have an issue that's fixed by one of these, go log into the site, go download the patch, apply it to your environment, you install it, you run ps-config to apply the changes to your content database. Poof, you've now been updated.
Poof.
Big change now is that all that work that I just described, now it's just poof, because it's all of the updates now are shipped out through Windows Update, which I've seen some people flip out about this because if you have Windows Update turned on to install things automatically, then Patch Tuesday could now turn into Hellish Wednesday morning, early morning-ish.
Yep.
I like the official comment.
All right, so there's 2 parts about this. Like, first, you should totally lay into me about this because A, it wasn't my call, and B, I've gotten a personal opinion on this, which is not the company line, and I don't actually know if it's accurate or not, so take it with a grain of salt. But here's my view on it. If you've got Windows updates turned on or automatic updates turned on your servers or your farm, you're a bad admin anyway.
Oh, ouch. We just lost our admin contingent. Okay, go ahead.
So that's the first part. So if you're worried about SharePoint patches coming down, but you're okay with Windows patches coming down automatically, that's a big call. Like that's the first thing, right? So if you're a really good admin, you're not doing any of these auto updates anyway. And so it will not touch your current workflow. But if you're a bad admin and you've got auto updates turned on, then yeah, you're going to get affected. Now, the reason why I think this was done is A, because it doesn't affect good admins, and B, because what was happening is people had automatic updates turned on in Windows, but would forget about ever patching SharePoint. And then when the Windows updates came down to those boxes, they were then breaking SharePoint and causing support problems and balking the box because the admins weren't keeping up with SharePoint updates and doing good patch management on the SharePoint side. And so we were ending up getting patches coming down from Windows, like the famous WCF patch, right? That came down, got installed on Windows and then broke SharePoint. Things like that. So because the two patch trains were getting so far apart, Windows patches were breaking SharePoint. And so for the bad patch management crew, we basically said, we've got to draw a line in the sand and you've got to be patched at a certain level going forward because otherwise we're just going to get too far apart and we're going to continually break.
You know, I'm not an admin. I'm not even going to try and play an admin, but
I will anyway.
No, I won't. I think, so the two things that bother me about this change is that, number one, I agree with you on the whole thing about how most admins, I'm not going to say good or bad admins. I'm just going to say that I think that a lot of people do have Windows Update turned off, or at least say download, don't install.
Yeah.
But the thing that concerns me is that there's a tremendous amount of small businesses that don't know the difference, or medium-sized businesses that don't know the difference.
Yep.
And stuff's going to blow up.
So why are they happy doing that with Windows but not with SharePoint?
Here's the other part of my concern is that this happened out of the blue, and the only way you found out about this was by an escalation engineer's blog post.
Yeah.
That if you don't subscribe to Stefan, which, let's face it, I don't think the majority of the SharePoint people are going to know who Stefan is.
Yeah.
The people who've been doing this for a while, we all know who Stefan is, and he's highly respected. It's gotten enough news around it to get some exposure to it. I'm in a private group on Yammer, private network on Yammer with a bunch of other MVPs and Microsoft people, and I was shocked at the lack of noise this caused.
That's a different issue. The comm strategy behind it, I completely agree, is a complete balked mess. But that's totally different from it being okay for Windows updates but not okay for SharePoint updates. Riddle me that. Why is it okay?
I can't, because I'm not in that. I don't serve that role. But I do. The thing that does concern me about it is that it was such an out of the blue kind of a thing.
Yeah.
We don't know. It just started shipping, and there's been no real explanation on why.
Yeah, that I totally understand.
So, hey, let's bring in Chris O'Brien here real quick. Chris, do you have a take on this issue?
It's an interesting area, isn't it? Because if you perhaps think of the track record of some of these updates, they haven't always been great. CJ might sort of shoot me for this.
Gosh, that's being polite.
CJ might shoot me for this, but am I right in thinking the team is Office Sustained Engineering that are responsible for some of the patch management and patch release strategy? Or is that an old term that doesn't exist anymore?
I don't know if they call themselves Sustained Engineering.
Okay, I just remember that some guys in a client that I work with, that Office Sustained Engineering group, they prefer to replace out the office with occasionally. Which maybe goes some way to kind of making you think a little bit about the difference, in perception at least, behind the difference between Windows updates and SharePoint updates.
Yeah, and that's completely fair. Like, there is not, like, you're right, there's been a pretty spotty track record of patches that have been pulled, CUs that have been broken, and things like that. So it's definitely a trust thing. Here's something to ponder, though. Like, if we go and do this and start breaking a whole bunch of businesses, who do you think they're going to call? Yeah. So
I mean, literally you. His cell phone number is 425.
I'll give you my wife's number. Hold on.
It's admin related. That's just as good.
She'll be so confused about people yelling at her about patches, and she'll be like, "What patches?" Anyway, but if you think about it, like I totally get it. The spotty track record is definitely a problem, right? And that's probably where the trust thing comes in. But that said, we're signing ourselves up for disaster if we don't get it right, or signing ourselves up for pain if we don't get it right. So we're holding ourselves accountable to in many ways to get it right. But there will be a lot of pain and suffering if we don't get it right. And partners and consultants will bear a brunt of that as well, not just Microsoft, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's why some of us guys have views on it as well. So you're right. It will be interesting to see how it goes. But, it's interesting even when you think about non-production environments that, you maybe have a different approach to. But, when they get taken down, that causes pain too. So I guess let's wait and see.
That was the first thing I did. Is I took a couple VMs that I use for presentations only, and I immediately went to those and was like, I'm double checking, make sure that those are already shut off. But here's another one. How about a conspiracy theory? And then it'd be cool if we could actually get somebody involved here.
This is from Rackley, isn't it?
No, this is for me. I just thought about this one. Okay. People were complaining that CUs had gotten so incredibly big to download and unpack and then try and install when you do the Windows update. Oh yeah, there are multiple gigs to go through and download and install them. So now when they ship, they're not shipped as a CU. The individual fixes are the ones that are shipped as part of SharePoint, and each one is downloaded and installed. So is it now that you can pick and choose which ones you wanted, and you don't just get the CU, you actually get a specific fix?
Oh, right. I hadn't thought about that.
Now I'm just talking out my rear end, so I'm just playing an admin on radio.
This is kind of analogous to, there's another product that we've got called Office, which if you're a 365 customer and you use the Office client, you can download and install Pro Plus, and it's updated in the same sort of way, not through Windows Update, but we trickle updates down to the client apps, right? Sort of monthly and things like that. And it can be new features and stuff like that, but it can also be, security fixes and things like that. And so customers have a problem with this today, right, where they say, we don't want our Office client applications just randomly changing every month. And so we have much like Windows Update and turning off auto updates, we have the ability to stop those changes flowing down to the Office clients from the cloud for up to 12 months, I think. And after 12 months, you don't get a choice. You've got to take the fix. But it's kind of analogous to that, right? It's you either get them automatically or you don't, in which case you switch off auto updating effectively and then do the patch management rollout yourself. So it will be interesting to see how it goes. I totally get the whole trust of the patch thing, which I really think is the root cause of part of the problem people have got with this. So we will see how it goes. It's we're not admins, so maybe I'm oversimplifying the problem a bit. But
does it now mean that we go from the early February 2013 update didn't work, but the late February 2013 update did work? Does it now mean we get the very late night Tuesday evening update didn't work, but the Wednesday evening one was just fine?
Yeah, maybe. I don't know.
All right, I'm going to move on.
Let's just say I hope we get the spottiness of the patches and CUs ironed out, and that's not a problem.
Yeah, me too. Okay, so hey, let's officially introduce our guest here. Before we do that, I'll have one quick little ask to let everybody know that if you're something that CJ and I have been talking about doing with the podcast, that if anybody is interested in sponsoring the podcast, we are more than interested in talking to you. We're not looking to make money on this whole thing, but if you haven't noticed, we've had our transcriptions have stopped recently, at least in the last 10 episodes. We'd like to get those back going again. So we're really just looking to help with covering costs. So if you're interested in doing that, reach out to us. We can be more than happy to sit there and discuss it with you. Best way to do it, just send either a tweet to @MSCloudShow or just go to the website to one of the episodes and send a message through our contact form. We'll get back in touch with you. So today, we like to welcome Chris O'Brien to the show. So Chris is a developer at heart, but occasionally dabbles in the infrastructure side of SharePoint too. He's an independent consultant, but has a long-standing relationship with content and code in the United Kingdom, where he currently acts as head of development. In this role, Chris oversees a group of about 20 developers with responsibility for best practice development standards and team readiness around SharePoint 2013, Office 365, and Azure. In addition, Chris does hands-on work and has led the implementation of large Office 365 hybrid solutions which feature heavy use of cloud development techniques, including SharePoint apps and Azure. And as a SharePoint MVP over the last few years, he's a regular speaker at SharePoint conferences and writes an architecture and dev-focused blog at SharePointNutsandBolts.com. Chris is a firm believer in bringing techniques such as continuous integration and automated testing to SharePoint development and has previously worked with Microsoft on a developer content in this area. you always write these bios yourself, and then you read them out, and you're like, that always felt long, didn't it?
Well, you see, I couldn't have said it better myself. It's almost like I gave you that.
The only thing that was hard was it was in italics. It was a little tough to pronounce.
Is written in an English accent in Word.
I didn't have to say whilst, so I'm okay. Hey, welcome to the show, Chris. Long time we've been wanting to have you on here.
Thanks, good to be here.
Yeah, thanks for coming on the show.
Hey, so I'm a big fan of your work. If anybody is not familiar with your blog, SharePoint Nuts and Bolts, it's definitely one of my top 10. You've always got great content and everything. You got a great perspective, a lot of thought behind it and stuff. Today, what I wanted to talk to you about, or what Chris and I wanted to talk to you about, is around a post that you published in January, which has gotten a lot of attention, around a topic that we've touched on a few times on the show, but I think that you've got some really good level-headed takes on it. And the title of the post is Developing for Office 365, Thoughts on Use of Custom Master Pages and Web Templates. This is a very contentious topic because I know that Microsoft, to me, wants us to do one thing, which is very different from what we have been doing in the SharePoint space for many, many years. And a lot of us don't feel like it is easy to just pivot straight over. And so one of the things you said in this post, and I can definitely resonate with, and I guess I'll just say it up front, that I'm pretty much the exact same mindset that everything you wrote about. I was just sitting here reading the post when it first came out, just nodding my head like, yep, I'm right there with you. There's been some content that's been coming out on the Microsoft Virtual Academy talking about these customizations by some very, very well-renowned Microsoft individuals, Steve Walker, Burke Jansen, Vesa Juvonen. I know I screwed that up again. I'm sorry, Vesa. You can just slap me silly next time I see you. But you had one comment in there that I totally agree with it, which is just that you said, I'm not sure that I agree with the guidance in all the cases. So why don't you kick us off here? Why don't you tell us a little bit about what the challenge that you see it is, and then we'll just have a discussion around it.
Okay. So, this is partly related to some of the guidance that is coming out of the Office 365 team these days. And I think we'd all expect that the kind of techniques that we'd use as developers, going back 6-7 years, I don't think anybody would expect for us to continue to be able to use those indefinitely. But these are big changes. Well, yeah, that's true. And I have to say that in my team of say nearly 20 devs, the level of knowledge around some of these techniques that have been around for so long. So let's say the feature XML schema or provisioning lists and the whole load of XML that go behind that. Yeah. I've got guys in my team that can do that blind, and they can spot an issue in that XML just with their eyes in a 1,200 line XML file, and that's one of the things I love about working with such a group of guys. But, these are big changes that are being recommended now. So the idea of maybe not using custom master pages in Office 365, that's like area 1. Not using custom web templates, that's area 2. And then area 3 would be moving away from the use of features and XML to provision things in SharePoint and moving to a code-based approach. And, these are techniques that have generally been around for years and years, especially the feature XML. So it's a big deal. And, I guess, from where I stand with a team of 20 guys, and we're busy with around, say, between 10 and 15 engagements, some on premises, some Office 365, you have to apply a level of thought to how you're going to deal with these changes and whether you go with them. And, for me, I'm just not sure that it makes 100% of sense to just lift and shift to the new approaches in every case. And the way I've been thinking about this is that, I understand some of the challenge for Microsoft and certainly running Office 365. It's not what I'd want as my job, for sure. But equally, there's an impact on us guys that work with the platform. So where I landed is that I think that some of the guidance makes sense in some of the cases. And like I say in the blog post, I think if you're doing anything around core SharePoint Online and team sites and collaboration, I think all the recommendations make 100% of sense there, because Microsoft's reasoning behind these changes is really that they don't want your customizations getting in the way of you receiving updates to Office 365. And I definitely agree with that. This is what our clients are paying for. When they're paying per user per month. They want this innovation. They want these new tools to the business, and we don't want to get in the way of that. And that's definitely the case for team sites and collaboration and core areas of SharePoint. But that's not the only thing that my team get asked to work on and build. Something else that's common is we want an intranet on Office 365. And we don't just mean collaboration. We mean publishing, we mean communications. It's going to be the organizational homepage. And it needs to be highly branded. It needs to be, maybe we need responsive design. This is going to be a big vehicle for our internal marketing. And there, I'm just not sure about the guidance in some ways. Because, okay, it would be great if we could achieve what we need to achieve there without a custom master page and without some of these techniques. But that doesn't always get us there. And the flip side, I think, of perhaps using a custom master page and maybe even using a custom web template is that actually you get some protection from some of these updates. And when I say protection, I mean, what we don't want is a 50,000 user organization, their homepage changing dramatically with no warning. It's just an update that comes down from Office 365 and, they need to do some communications around it and so on. And maybe, what happens in that case is some kind of breaking change. Maybe it's front end, it's HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, or maybe it's something else. Maybe it's tied to a customization. But, my logic is that in those cases, for the publishing-based environments, maybe you do proactively choose to have a custom master page and a custom web template to almost get that layer of protection around automatic updates.
It's interesting you say that. That's a thought that I don't think was ever really pitched in all the stuff that's been pushed out. The pitch that always seems to be coming across from Microsoft, and then the issues that people usually get frustrated with is that, I want to be able to do my customizations. So I want to be able to have, and the way I've always done that is to do that using custom master pages or using web templates to stub out, hundreds or tens of thousands or thousands of sites that all look the same. I want to be able to repeat the same kind of customizations using features, using a declarative approach that I've been told is the right way to do it. I've never been really encouraged to do it the code way, even though code and declarative has been the two options for really since 2007, and really more so in the last two versions with 2010 and 2013. But I think that your last point that you made about, maybe you don't want to have those changes that Microsoft applies to 365. Maybe you don't want those to be applied right away. I mean, I know that when I sit down and I do custom applications that are going to live on top of SharePoint, one of the things I like to do is I like to make sure and reuse as much of the SharePoint UI as possible, because I'm a developer and the one thing I hate doing is teaching end users. And so they already know how to use SharePoint. If they don't, that's not my problem. That's my customer's problem. I can help them with that, but that's a different invoice. So I say that kind of tongue in cheek, but the idea is that I want my UI to look as much like SharePoint. But what I don't want is I don't want to have my app all of a sudden magically break when Microsoft introduces a new thing. Either it breaks because they unintentionally did something in the sense of unknowingly, I think it was either last year or the year before when they introduced a new object or variable on the window object in the DOM called require, which blew up anything that used require.js, which is a very common asynchronous module loader. So for me, it was one that I like to take the approach of saying, I'm going to do all of my stuff without the custom master page. I'm going to do all my stuff with HTML. And when there is an update from Microsoft around 365, we will watch for it, we will monitor for it. But my customer and I get to choose and test and roll those things into our custom applications. Otherwise, I've run into the case a couple times where I know you work for an organization with a lot of developers that work for you, and independent. I have I also have independent, so I'm doing a lot of one-off kind of stuff, usually solo stuff. I build a project, I ship it, I walk away to go to the next customer. All of a sudden, something ships in SharePoint or in Office 365, it breaks my application. And even though we've signed off on it, the customer still thinks that I'm the one that's supporting it and I'm the one that should still go back and fix it. And then it's the whole explanation of, no, had nothing to do with me. They did something that we had no idea was coming down the road. It broke the app, we can fix it. But then we have this battle of, is it included in the cost? Is it not included in the cost? You've already paid me, whatever. So that level of insulation, or that level of, I will take those updates that are rolled out, I'll monitor them, I'll let you know about them, and I will apply them to the application as you want, but we'll do it on our schedule, not on Microsoft's schedule, because a lot of the times these things that come out with 365, you don't know the schedule of when they're coming out. There is a roadmap, but you don't know that it's coming on Tuesday or that it's coming in 2 weeks or even that it is coming. You could be a company, a really large company with multiple tenants, and some of your company's seeing the problem, the rest of it isn't, because they're in two different tenants that are in different rollout schemes.
Right, and that's basically the logic that I'm thinking of here. And there's multiple layers to this conversation. You know, if I think about where we are in the development world compared to, say, 5 years ago, I think 5 years ago, the kind of guys that I would work with and the clients I'd work with, we were all quite gung-ho about development. We can write the code for that. We've got the API, we've got the skills. Let's go build some code. And the first layer of the conversation is almost, even in my most hardcore devs, we are thinking, all right, let's try and avoid code as our number one sort of starting position, right? We don't want to customize where we can help it. Let's almost see if we can steer the client in a certain way and work out if there's some other way of solving this problem. And then the next layer of the conversation is, okay, we've established maybe that code and some kind of custom solution is appropriate here. And there's no other way to do this, and the business requirement is valid. Okay, all right, so let's consider code. And then, sometimes we can build apps, and to have something that's slightly separate from SharePoint Online, maybe that sits outside, maybe it's a provider-hosted app or an Office 365 app. For some requirements, that works great. And we can transition the user around the user experience, and we can build a user journey that makes sense. And we've got quite a few apps that are like that. They're provider hosted, they're in Azure, they sit outside of SharePoint, and they're a great poster child for the app model. But we also get requirements that, it's valid from the business side, and really it needs to sit right within SharePoint. It's the only logical place that is going to make sense for the business, for the users. And in this case, this whole conversation becomes very valid. You can't really avoid it. And I think even in this proposal of maybe not going with the guidance in all cases, choosing to use a custom master page, choosing to use a custom web template, I think it's still not any guarantee, because some of the kinds of updates that could come from the Office 365 team, they'll be to underlying DLLs, they'll be to controls that are already in pages, and even some of these steps might not protect you from them. But my view is I'll kind of take whatever I can, actually, in terms of these protection layers. And, if there's, in a given 18-month period, if there's 3 updates that could break my homepage for 50,000 users, if I only get hit by 1 instead of 3, then I kind of feel like that's a win,
Yes.
So before I get started on this, I've always enjoyed Chris's commentary on this stuff because he's always the voice of sense and reason. And out of all of the people in the community who jump on the bandwagon and bash and bash and bash, Chris O'Brien is always the one you can count on to blog in a sense and reasonable manner.
Yeah.
And in a balanced perspective, right? What you're saying is assess all of your options, pick the ones that are right based on the requirements and the customer and the technology, and not just, blindly walk into a situation that you're going to corner yourself. And so that's, I think, extremely refreshing, and also why I stay tuned to your blog regularly.
And it's interesting because I think the whole sort of analyze, think carefully and then decide approach is the way to go. But overall, I see various things happening in the SharePoint world, and quite a lot of noise about the changes that are coming down and new models around app development, whether it's the app for SharePoint and app for Office model, or, developing Office 365 apps. I kind of see, various bits of noise around the community, and, this scenario is broken and this doesn't work, and, this model isn't stacking up and so on. And I kind of can't see it like that, really, because if I take a step back from the whole thing, to me, the remote code and the app model is actually working, because I perceive Office 365 as a largely stable platform. It can't be easy to run, but Microsoft are having huge success at scaling the platform. the tools that are coming to the business are just awesome, and all the clients that we work with are pretty amazed at what's in the pipeline and the impact Office 365 can have on their business right now. But at the same time, it is customizable. So we've got the remote code model, and we've got the ways of customizing inside SharePoint, so long as we take care. And ultimately, we've got this this situation where Office 365 is stable. Yeah, I can do the customizations if I really need to. Mm-hmm. So, there's always going to be something that doesn't quite work.
With change, it's always hard. Some people deal with it better than others, right? And a great wise friend of mine, Mike Fitzmaurice, said, it's the who moved my cheese scenario, right? It's like, things are changing. Some people deal with it a little better than others. And I think we're seeing, you're on the side of sense and reason, and there are some others that aren't quite as logical and thought out as that.
Did you just give Mike Fitzmaurice credit for using the who moved my cheese?
Yeah, totally.
Okay, that's impressive. It's funny, Chris, you were saying a few minutes ago about your developers used to rush in, say, we want to go build stuff with code. We see an opportunity. We can write some code to go do this. To where now people are saying, your developers now are saying, let's see if we can do this more out of the box. And if we need to write custom code, we can. But let's see what other options are out there. So I see the same thing. Part of the reason I think I see this, and I'm curious what your take is, do you see this more as, number one, it's part of the SharePoint platform or 365 platform in the sense that the product is much more open with things like support for the stuff that they built out to support the app model, the OAuth support, the better CSOM, the better REST approach, the more embracing of don't run your stuff in us, run it somewhere else. So you have the ability to get out of SharePoint and do more bespoke style development and not be constrained. I mean, when I was reading your bio, part of it said something about continuous integration. I mean, I knew that you were always the guy to go to for continuous integration, but I also knew that it was something I never wanted to go to because it was a 12-step process just to get involved in it. And then once you got through that 12 steps, you had to go through another 12 steps to get off the sauce that you got onto while you were trying to get it up and running, right?
And SharePoint's always been more difficult for some things than plain.NET and the wider platforms, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so when you see that, this embrace of the product of saying, now you can work better outside of SharePoint, so that we can take advantage of all the technologies and approaches and platforms and patterns that other bespoke style development is available to us. And then we have things like Microsoft Azure, and we have this concept of more of a platform as a service model to where I don't have to build my own queuing service. I don't have to build my own routing service. I don't have to build my own scaling service and stuff like this. Everything is all taking, there's a lot of these things that I can buy, do a la carte, take these things together, assemble them inside of my application that may be living inside of Azure, but it's also consuming data from SharePoint and building more mashups in a sense. Do you see that as kind of also having something to kind of promote or kind of push this kind of approach or feeling that developers are having to where we're maybe not rushing so much to let's see what I can build?
Well, I think there's almost two sides to it. And it's interesting about what is the definition of a SharePoint developer these days. For me, I need to have the right mix of skills in the people around me and that are building things, in that you need some guys that really know product, right? Because what you need to do at the architecture level, at the development architecture level, is make the right call on whether this is something that should sit inside SharePoint or could feasibly sit outside SharePoint. To do that, you need people that really understand what's in the box, and maybe coding options that are on the SharePoint platform. So you need somebody and people that understand that side. And then, you need people that, okay, if this is something that is going to sit outside SharePoint, it's maybe on Azure, it's something provider hosted or some kind of app, then you need people with the deep sort of general web dev skills that can make that happen. And what I'm finding is it's actually an interesting time for age-old SharePoint developers who are maybe a little bit weak on the wider dev platforms, maybe
Definitely.
JavaScript frameworks and so on. We don't have like deep knockout and Angular skills in some areas of the team. Yeah, CJ nodding there. But it is a problem for some SharePoint developers. They would do a great job of giving you some custom actions and delegate controls and timer jobs and web parts and so on. But if you need to build a single page app or something with heavy use of, remote APIs of SharePoint, they're in some problems there.
Yeah.
So, I almost think that you need to have something of both, right? You need to understand products. You need to understand what the web parts are, what the things are in the box. Could I just build this with a content search web part or some other kind of roll up? Or do I need something more complex that's an app outside SharePoint? And, maybe what you need, if you can't have so many guys that have all of that to a deep level, maybe you need a combination, and you're getting the skills covered that way.
It's funny you were saying that you were talking about custom actions and stuff. You and I had an opportunity to present together. It was one of the most fun sessions I've ever done. It was also one of the most unique because do you remember what happened right before our session? Yep. I remember CJ was sitting in the front row and he was like, "Don't you dare put that on screen." It was, I think, within 5 minutes of starting our session is when the news broke that Steve Jobs passed away.
Yeah.
And it was a tough start to the session, but we did one of those, I'm going to call it a 700 level session, where I look back at it and I see the kind of stuff that we're doing today, and I'm like, there's no way in the world I would ever want to do that in SharePoint today. We were talking about how to do some really robust ribbon customizations. Stuff that I have, it's still great samples that I still keep going back to them and sharing with people. I still get questions to this day from people asking for those samples. And apparently when Microsoft shut down the code gallery, the article that's up on MSDN that pointed to some of our samples, it disappeared.
Right.
Yeah, so I had to go through and post a comment on the article and put up a new GitHub repository going, here's all of our stuff.
That was a great session, yeah.
That was a lot of fun.
One quick point on that.
Go ahead.
Along similar lines, doesn't it make you look back at the things you used to do and think, man, oh man, that was ugly?
Oh, absolutely.
Can you think of all of the things you've built in your professional life? And the beauty of hindsight's wonderful, of course, and we can't change history. But doesn't it make you look back and go, wow, like if only we had what we have now then, how things would have been different? Because I'm sure there are still loads of SharePoint consultants running around the planet building really complicated solutions in SharePoint only world without that view of like stepping back and saying, like, if I've got all these other tools at my disposal, would I make the same choices?
Yeah.
It just horrifies me to think of all of the of all the things that I've built in my past.
Well, it's funny you say that, because I think the best sort of lessons and the best journey you can take are probably to have built some of those things in SharePoint that maybe don't stand the test of time. And I hold my hand up and say that, I've been involved in a couple of those where we had a great solution. We built a social layer on top of SharePoint 2010. It was kind of ahead of its time. But man, that thing needed a lot of timer jobs.
Yeah.
And,
I think I remember you showing me that at Evolutions conference a few years ago.
Functionality-wise and capability-wise, it was awesome. But, whether you could I guarantee that thing would scale to 100,000 users, 150,000 users? Yeah, I don't know. And it is very true to say that where we are ending up with SharePoint and Office 365 development is an infinitely better place.
Yeah.
Right. So to have complex, heavy lifting stuff outside of SharePoint and have these remote options, that is a far better place. And, I'm just pleased to see that we ended up there. And I do think that the kind of individuals that often make the best architecture choices here are the guys that have built the ones that failed somewhere along the way.
Yeah,
and
you learn from your lessons, right?
Yeah.
I'll take that one step further too, because I think that, when you look at even the stuff that I agree with you that we're going in the right direction. I like this new model, and I'm not going to call it the app model. I just like this new model or this new approach of leveraging SharePoint. To me, I look at SharePoint or Office 365 today as more of like EPAS. It's enterprise platform as a service. I'm going to leverage the workflow. I'm going to leverage user profile stuff just the same way as PaaS and Azure is going to give me developer components that I can take advantage of. So for me, it's like enterprise level components that I can use in an app. But I think that, one of the other things that we're even seeing this still changing even today, where more and more stuff is getting out of the domain, in a sense, of the SharePoint or 365 space, like the app model. We're moving away, I shouldn't say we're moving away, that we have this new Azure AD app model that we're taking a dependency on, which can integrate with 365, but so much other stuff as well. And so I think it's a good approach to the good direction we're going. You've got something in your blog post that I don't want to I'm going to put you on the spot with it because I'd like to get your thoughts on it. But it's one full paragraph, takes a second to read. But I think I was banging my head against the wall, just like going, God, someone finally said this. So I'm in full agreement. So I'm not putting you too much on the spot here. I'm just the one with the mic, and I get to sit there and ask you to respond to it. So let me go ahead and just read this real quick. So you say, only a couple of those things. These are things that we can actually do in an XML approach in Sandbox Solutions. So we can do things like provision web parts, lists and libraries, fields, content types, etc. Only a few of those things, specifically feature receivers, field controls, and delegate controls, cannot be used at all in the sandbox and therefore SharePoint Online. But you can achieve the same thing in other ways. The rest can, but Microsoft is starting to say that we should use remote code where possible instead of XML. The reason for this is that inside SharePoint, the functionality becomes dependent on an XML file somewhere instead of purely being within provisioned items in the content database. And this could make some kinds of system upgrades more complex. Now, this is where you make a strong point here, and I really like this. I'll use your word. Whilst, did I say that right?
Whilst. It's English, yo.
Whilst this is an interesting SharePoint engineering, quote, thing, it's somewhat hard to see this as our problem rather than the Office 365 engineering's team. After all, these upgrades are mainly things that Microsoft will undertake as part of running SharePoint Online. The, quote, content database upgrade, unquote, step as part of, say, upgrading Office 365 to use SharePoint 2015 or whatever would be an example.
Yeah, and this is...
He's basically calling us out and saying we're giving out guidance to make our jobs easier.
Basically, yeah. And
yeah.
I agree, yeah.
And like I say, I would not want the job of trying to scale and run the Office 365 platform. I have the utmost respect for the guys that are in those roles, and I think they're doing an awesome job, all told. But it is interesting because, we're being asked to change the approach, and that does imply some pain to us and some extra effort. When I think about the kind of things developers are saying about the new approaches, there's some interesting situations that you run into. Okay, so I can write code to achieve some of these things. And for most things now, there is an API, a couple of gaps, but, we're closing those. But you get into some interesting situations. We have less tooling. We have less support from Visual Studio. Some code things are just going to take longer. And that's even with the Office Dev Patterns and Practices sort of framework, which we use daily. I think there's awesome stuff in there. It's still not quite as quick and easy as using some of these approaches of feature XML that is okay and still is supported in the sandbox. I completely get that we want to remove code from sandbox solutions, and we need to get rid of that. But ultimately, I think it is a shame if we aren't able to use any of these sort of XML-based approaches, because they all work. They're okay in sandbox solutions. That if we could still support those, then it seems a shame to make big changes when it's just really for engineering on the Office 365 side. And just one example of something you could run into. So, okay, provisioning a file. We used to have the module element for that. We can use that in a sandbox solution that has no code, right? A no-code sandbox solution. We can do it in code as well, but provisioning a file to SharePoint in code is definitely harder and is definitely going to take longer. And you run into some interesting situations like, okay, well, in a module, the file would live in my Visual Studio project and it would be taken from there and provisioned into SharePoint. If this is remote code in Azure, where is that master file kept? Do I provision that to Azure? Do I provision it to some master list in SharePoint and then copy it to...
Who controls it?
Yeah, then copy it to the right location. And, some of these patterns are still to emerge, I guess. So, it's a shame to make wholesale changes to the model.
I wouldn't necessarily call it a wholesale change. It's guidance at the end of the day, right? What you're saying is still fully supported. We've got no plans of taking it away. So it's using the tools that are at your disposal.
I think the message might be stronger than that from engineering. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm going to disagree with you, CJ, a little bit on that, because just the fact that the message has come out feels like I've been put on notice, right? It feels like I'm just like, you know what? If we're saying you shouldn't be doing this anymore, even though it's there, you've been put on notice that this could go away one day. User code has now been deprecated. Let's rewind 2 years ago. User code has been deprecated, or 3 years ago, I guess, from Sandbox Solutions. Does that mean I can't do custom code in Sandbox Solutions anymore? Like, no, you can. But it's been deprecated. Fast forward to today, it's gone. right? We can't do that in the cloud, and it's turned off by default on-prem. So I look at certain things, like there are still certain things today that the app model does not facilitate me doing in an easy way. And when I say easy, I don't mean like, wizard, click, 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 I'm done. But I mean, without a significant amount of work, it does not facilitate me doing certain things the way I could do them in Sandbox Solutions. So I'll take an example that a very common thing that I end up doing is building single-page apps. And if I want to build a single-page app and I want it to run within the context of a SharePoint site, but not in the context of an app web as an actual app, I can put it together in a Sandbox solution. That's going to consist of multiple HTML files, multiple JavaScript files. Yes, for performance reasons, I can go through and compile the HTML down to JavaScript. I can minify everything, concatenate it, put it all together. Other way around. Concatenate it, minify it, put it all together and make it a lot slimmer down. But still, that's a bunch of stuff that I'm going to have to go through and write a bunch of code just to deploy my application. And to me, I don't feel like that's right. To me, I still want to be able to deploy this as a Sandbox solution. I've done that before for one person trying to go where they said we didn't want to use Sandbox solutions because they thought they were going to completely go away. It could not live inside of an app web, so we had to provision it in. We spent about 70% of the time of the development. So we spent, let's say it took 10 hours to build the entire application. It took an additional 7.5 hours to build out the deployment code to get that to provision those files programmatically from a package that was running in some other website. To me, that's just, I hear them saying, here's what we want people to do. My response would say, then make it easier for me to do that.
Sure.
Yeah.
No, that's totally fair.
Give me the ability to declare those things declaratively, and then I'll give it to some routine that you already have, and you'll ingest that stuff and use my XML or use my JSON or whatever, use that as a manifest to say, we need to go upload all this stuff into SharePoint. It's just, instead of sucking it in from a Sandbox solution or a farm solution in the SharePoint environment, do it from something that lives out there.
Yeah. And that kind of comes back to the point I was making that some business solutions just sit better inside SharePoint than outside, and at the moment we don't really have a great model if we can't really use no-code Sandbox solutions for provisioning those. And I completely get that there's some bits of SharePoint that we in SharePoint Online that we really need to avoid sort of touching. I think Microsoft are now quite clear on the suite bar and navigation. I think about the new app launcher and my apps page as things that we shouldn't really be touching. I think we need to be really careful around personal site stuff. So, personimmersive.aspx and changes around, the OneDrive for Business area. I completely get that we need to take care around those areas and we shouldn't really customize them. Those are the kind of solutions that, we try and talk our clients out of. We're not comfortable doing too much here. But some of the other things that are just pages in sites and apps, well, we got to find ways of doing those, I think.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah, totally.
Well, hey, Chris, I got two more questions for you. I guess one of them's going to be pretty easy and pretty quick, but one of them, all the stuff we've talked about here, we focused the discussion around master pages and around customizations of SharePoint and Office 365. What else do you see? Like, what other things are on your mind these days? You're one of those people that, we get together at a conference or something, and it's always like, that's one of the guys I want to sit next to at dinner when we all go out, not at one of the crazy dinners, but we're just sitting down having a glass of wine or whatever, and we're going to be there for an hour or two, and we can just shoot the breeze and just, whatever in the technology space or whatever. What's on your mind these days? What are you looking at?
Well, I guess there's a few things there. So, the whole landscape is changing, I think, faster than it ever has done for people in our space. And, it's interesting, people that used to be big on the SharePoint scene are no longer. Maybe they don't like the changes or they can't keep up and so on. For me, I love the openness that comes out of Microsoft these days. And, a bit like the announcement on, the storage agnostic capability we were talking about earlier, the Office Online apps, being able to use those from different places. I love it that every two to 3 months now, there's a big Microsoft announcement that makes me go, whoa, what? I didn't see that coming. And, when you stop and analyze it, it actually makes sense. You definitely see the logic behind it, but they're big moves on the part of Microsoft. And the company has changed so much from, I got into Microsoft technologies and, around Encompass resolution. That's my background. I sort of was around then. And the company is practically not recognizable compared to that era. So I love the fact that there's this kind of attitude and this openness now.
Yeah.
I was in a meeting yesterday and we were looking through the list of stuff that's coming, sort of big, what we call like big rocks, right? The big rock announcements that are going to be made basically between now and sort of July timeframe. And I think there's a few wows coming yet. So we've got a few more tricks up our sleeve.
I can imagine. And, it's hard to really argue against the Office 365 proposition, I think. When I look at what our clients are getting for their money here, and the fact that it's not just a closed box, it's not going to stay as it is, the offering is going to evolve and get better. I think it's a great deal, and I'm really pleased that Microsoft are pushing hard there. It makes it easy to be in the Microsoft camp these days, I think.
Isn't that funny? Because it's you ask the majority of people that went to, say, SPC09 that same question, I think they'd have a completely different view back then, and maybe yourself even back then.
Yeah.
But it's definitely a lot has changed in the last few years.
I'll take that even farther than you said that, CJ. I mean, I'll go back just 18 months. And I had a very negative outlook on the company. I mean, I was like, I don't like the direction this company is going in. There's nothing interesting. There's nothing exciting. I feel like Microsoft is an IBM right now. And it's just like, a little ho-hum. Great way to describe it. This earlier today, so again, it's February 18th, there's IT Unity did a Ask Me Anything with Sonia Koptev. I thought it was really an Ask Me Anything. It was actually an Ask Me Anything about SharePoint forms, right? So I had a couple questions in there that were like, yeah, these don't really apply. I'm like, well, no, they don't, if that's what you're asking. But I was able to get the last question in, though. And it was one that I like to ask a lot of people at Microsoft, which is, what has the impact? I asked it of Arpan in the episode that we shipped this week in the last episode. But what is the impact of Satya? By the way, you still owe me $50 because I beat you on the bet. That's my seat.
Oh yeah, I still owe you that money. Sorry.
Yep. But what is the impact on Satya? What has he had on your work and the people around you? And Sonia had a great response today. It's the first time I've heard somebody say it like this. To paraphrase what she said, she's like, people are innovating. They're not scared to innovate. The walls are gone. Like everybody is forward leaning. Like what Chris said a second ago, every once in a while, the way you described it, Chris, about just going, wow, what the hell? I mean, seeing like Microsoft coming out with, I knew that the Office was coming out or was available on the iPad. Sorry, I know it was built for Office on the iPad, but it wasn't being shipped. Then it shipped. It only works for SkyDrive. It's like, okay, I can see that's the typical Microsoft thing. And then out of the blue, now we do Dropbox, now we do Box, now we do iCloud, now we do this, now we do that. It's like, well, okay, that one I didn't see. Yeah, we got this cool thing called HoloLens, and it's going to kick the crap out of this thing that Oculus Rift and, the day before, Google Glass shut their business down because, well, they shut their business down. It's like, what? Where did this come from?
Hey, I heard an interesting... I liked Sonia's point about the walls coming down and things, but I heard a slightly different take on it, which was there was a lot of the company that was interested in doing this, but wasn't let or wasn't allowed.
Or didn't feel comfortable pitching it.
Or didn't feel comfortable, right? And so I don't think it's a top-down thing that Satya's done. I think it's a bottom-up thing that he's allowing.
And that's what she said. That's one of the things she said is that it's no longer, people don't feel like inhibited.
Right.
To do those things. I never thought, I worked at a startup with 20 people, and I was blown away by the culture of that company. And then I watched a corporation buy us out. I saw the culture go away. I thought there's no way to get it back. I thought that it was like you were completely off your rocker, that you're going to say that a company of 80,000 was not going to change their culture. Maybe it's what you said. Maybe the culture was there, and maybe that it just wasn't, it was being inhibited, or people weren't actually pushing those things. I can't believe that just the change of one individual, since then, it's what I've seen from the outside being a company that has just opened up and has just been a totally different culture from interacting with you, other people at Microsoft. It's amazing the night and day difference. I know we do this like every 3 shows. I feel like I go on this rant, but
I understand that why you'd have that view. And I agree in part. I don't think it's the only thing, but I think it's a pretty significant piece of it for sure. But there's been a lot of other changes inside of Microsoft in the last 12 to 18 months, besides just a new CEO. The entire leadership team has almost completely changed. there's been huge reorganizations internally. There's a lot of things that have flowed from this. So although I'd love to just pin it on Satya, and I pin a lot of it on him, I wouldn't say it's everything.
Yeah. Well, hey, cool. So, hey, Chris, before we wrap up here, where can people see you? Where can people find you coming up online, in the flesh? Where can they find you?
All right. So in the flesh, I think the next conferences and so on that I'll be at, there's SharePoint Evolutions in April in London, which is a great conference that I love, partly because it's on my doorstep. It's where I live. And I get everybody coming to me and complaining about jet lag, which is usually the other way around.
Looking forward to that one.
Yeah. So I'll see you guys there. Also Ignite, of course. So I'm choosing Ignite over Build because, I think Build will obviously have loads of dev content, but I'm an Office 365 and SharePoint guy these days, and I think Ignite is where I want to be just for the broad coverage. Blog is still there, still going. So just got a few articles in the queue. So that's SharePointNutsandBolts.com. More stuff coming there around these topics, and on Twitter, of course. So that's Chris O_Brian. That's my Twitter handle. So still talking SharePoint and Office 365 there.
Awesome. Well, hey man, I wish I would see you at Build. I'm gonna do all three of them. So I'll go from East Coast to UK to West Coast US to Chicago, and then I might see my kids when I come home, I guess.
You are going to be a wreck, young man. A wreck.
Nice.
Excellent work. Yeah, I'd say thanks a lot for coming on the show, Chris. It's been great having you on and chatting about these topics and stuff. So I appreciate the time, and hope to see you at Ignite.
Yep. Well, I'm honoured, guys. I'm a regular listener when I'm running, so it's great to be here.
Regular listener, first-time caller?
Something like that.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Chris. Really appreciate it.
All right. See you soon, guys.
Cheers.
If you have a question for us, go to microsoftcloudshow.com/questions, where you can submit it as text or record it as a WAV or MP3 and provide a link so we can play your question on the show. You can subscribe to us in iTunes by searching for Microsoft Cloud Show or via RSS at microsoftcloudshow.com, where you'll also find a full transcript and show notes of each episode. You can also find us on Facebook, searching for Microsoft Cloud Show, or on Twitter at MS Cloud Show. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.